Welcome to part 3 of the VenueMagic Events tutorial as part of the Secrets of the VenueMagic Masters series of video tutorials. In this video, we will show you how to set up event conditions, which will allow an event to trigger only if certain conditions are met. The Event Conditions feature is available only in VenueMagic SC Plus Edition and above. Also, some of the features we will be discussing require VenueMagic SC Plus version 4.0.
It is expected that you have already viewed all of the VenueMagic Getting Started tutorial videos, and that you have at least some experience working with VenueMagic.
Suppose you've added a Run Timeline event to the event track of another timeline you created for your haunted house or escape room, but you don't want that event to trigger at its designated time unless someone is standing on a footpad or a particular switch is on, or both. Let's go back to the timeline we created in part 1 and add a condition to the Run Timeline event we added to it.
Double-click on the event in the Event track to open the Run Timeline Event Properties and select the Conditions tab. Then click Add.
The first thing we need to do is select a condition type.
For now, select External Input with the constant. We'll take a look at the others later. Leave Boolean operation at the default and go right to value number 1 source.
Click Select to open the Select External Control window. Video number 17 of the Getting Started videos covers the Select External Control window, which is used prolifically throughout VenueMagic for various purposes. If you don't know about the Select External Control window, I recommend you go back and watch that video, which describes how to use that window in the context of VenueMagic's channel routing feature. Put simply, this window allows you to select from a list of input devices VenueMagic can interface to.
Some of the devices on this list will give you access to hardware that can be used to connect to a switch or perhaps a floor sensor.
Since it's not the purpose of this video to show you how to interface with external hardware, we'll select something that we can actually see in the VenueMagic application, specifically the Virtual Control Surface, or VCS. The VCS is also mentioned in Getting Started video 17 if you need to go back and review it. By default, the VCS has only one slider. You can see that I've added a few more while you weren't looking. We'll select the first slider of Group 1 and click OK. Now we'll select a compare operation. All hardware inputs into VenueMagic, whether it be the VCS, a MIDI slider console, DMX input, or even a digital input connected to a switch, are always translated into a number between 0 and 100%. For a switch, the value would be either 0% or 100%. For a VCS slider, the value can be 0%, 100%, or anything in between. For our purposes, we don't want our event to trigger unless the VCS slider value is greater than 50%. Now let's try it out. First, we'll need to open the VCS panel if it is not open already. In the main menu, go to View, Virtual Control Surface. We'll start with slider 1 set to 100%, which is higher than 50%, and run our timeline starting time cursor close to the event so we don't have to wait forever for it to get there. Notice that the event ran the timeline when its time was reached. Now let's move the slider down to 0% or to any value equal to or less than 50% and run our timeline again. You can see that this time the event did not run the timeline because the slider was lower than 50%. Now let's suppose that a single condition is not enough for us. Maybe we want the event to trigger only if slider 1 is above 50% and slider 2 is below 50%. So let's open our event condition settings and set that up. Add another event condition and select External Input with Constant as the comparison type. Then select slider 2 is less than 50. The Boolean operation settings lets us choose how this will be compared with the previous condition. If we select AND, this means that both conditions we entered must be true. If we select OR, then either condition can be true for the event to run the timeline.
The XOR option is a little trickier. And we'll leave you with the job of figuring that out from the VenueMagic help manual. As always, you can get there by pressing F1. As you can see, the conditions list has two conditions now. Slider 1 must be greater than 50, and slider 2 must be less than 50. Let's add a few more conditions and have some fun. Our conditions list now requires that slider 1 be greater than 50, and slider 2 must be less than 50, and slider 3 be greater than 80, and slider 4 be less than 30, or slider 5 be equal to 100. These conditions will be evaluated in the order that they appear on the list. The "or" at the end of the list means that all of these conditions must be true, or you can override all of them by pushing slider 5 to 100%.
Now let's close everything up and do a save all. By the way, you should always do a save all as often as possible so you don't lose any changes.
Now let's set all our sliders to the proper positions to make all the event conditions evaluate to true, except for slider 5, which we will leave at 0. Then play the timeline. As expected, the event runs the second timeline. Now move one slider out of place and run the timeline again. This time the event did not run the second timeline because slider 3 is less than 80%, and our condition list requires it to be above 80%. This time, let's mess them all up and push slider 5 to 100%.
This time the event triggered and the timeline played. That's because the condition list evaluates true if sliders 1 through 4 are in their proper positions, or if slider 5 is at 100%. I don't know about you, but to me this looks a lot like the beginning of a good escape room puzzle. A little clunky perhaps, but still useful. Just so you know, VenueMagic offers a great way to handle passcodes and combinations for escape rooms and other purposes. We'll leave that to part 6 video of the VenueMagic Events series. Now let's briefly take a look at the other conditions types available to our event. External input with another external input lets you do a comparison between two external inputs. Notice how the section below changed so we can compare our first external input to a second external input rather than to a constant. Next, we can set up a condition that detects if an external input has changed by a certain percentage since the last time it was evaluated as true. This condition type is not as useful with timeline events. It's actually more suited for events in the event table, which we will be discussing in the next video. For situations where the condition logic is too complex to be represented as a list of conditions linked by simple and ors, VenueMagic will let you write the condition in the form of a mathematical or logical relationship between VenueMagic inputs and outputs. This feature is well beyond the scope of this video. In fact, the expression editor could have a video series all of its own. So we'll leave it at that for now. Feel free to play with it using the help manual as a guide if you like. There's a couple more things we should cover before we move on to the next video. Going back to the Conditions tab, there are two more settings that are quite interesting.
The delay seconds settings is meant to be used primarily for events triggered inside timelines. Enter the number of seconds you want to wait after timeline playback has reached the event to actually trigger the event. As an example, I'll set the delay time to 5 seconds and close the event settings. Now, our event, which has been set to trigger at about 2 minutes and 39 seconds, will actually trigger 5 seconds later at around 2 minutes 44 seconds. Let's play the timeline and see what happens. Notice that even though the first timeline had reached its end and stopped, the delayed event still started playback of the second timeline 5 seconds after the event had been reached by the timeline playback. Using the delay time setting, a timeline can set events into motion that can trigger long after its parent timeline has finished playing or was stopped by the user or another event. Just keep in mind that if you have set up conditions for triggering the event in the timeline, those conditions will be evaluated at the end of the delay time, not at the point where playtime reaches the event. For example, if our sliders are all set to the correct positions when timeline playback reaches the event, and we move them to incorrect positions before the end of the delay, the event will not trigger after the delay time is up. Now, let's go back and look at the last setting in Event Properties Conditions tab called Trigger Probability.
Trigger probability defines the probability that the event will actually trigger when all conditions are met. At 100%, the event will trigger always at its designated time on the timeline, assuming all specified conditions are met. At 0%, it will never trigger, and at 50%, it will randomly trigger only half the time. This random factor can add an intriguing level of unpredictability to your show. Instead of a constant probability value, you can even specify an external input to provide a variable one. Tying this to a VCS slider or other external control will give you manual control of how frequently the event will trigger. We'll explore this further and have lots of fun when we cover randomized timeline playback
In a later tutorial, it will blow your mind.
Coming up in Part 4 of the VenueMagic Event series, you'll learn about the event table and how VenueMagic responds to switches, buttons, sensors, and other inputs when triggered by the user.